Bradley Jenkins broke his fiancée's wrist, left her bleeding on the floor, and went to a gala as though nothing had happened. He believed fear would keep her silent. What he did not know was that the quiet man who visited her bakery every Thursday had been watching over her for 2 years. At 9:45 that night, one phone call told Dante Moretti exactly what Bradley had done, and before midnight, Boston's most feared mafia boss was standing outside Bradley's door, ready to become the consequence he never believed would come. She was a fat woman in a world that constantly demanded she apologize for taking up space, and no one demanded that apology louder than her fiancé, Bradley Jenkins. Bradley was a junior partner at a prestigious downtown Boston real estate firm, a man whose entire existence revolved around appearances, high-end scotch, and the reflection he saw in the mirror. Madeline, with her soft, generous curves, thick thighs, and full face, was supposedly his charity case, or at least that was the narrative he spun to his Ivy League friends when she wasn't listening. He stayed with her, he claimed, because she was loyal, submissive, and kept his pristine Commonwealth Avenue apartment spotless. The truth was far darker. Bradley kept Madeline around because breaking down a woman who already struggled with her self-worth gave him a twisted sense of absolute power. It was a freezing Tuesday evening in late November. The wind howled against the floor-to-ceiling windows of their luxury apartment. Madeline stood in front of the hallway mirror, nervously smoothing down the fabric of a deep emerald wrap dress. It was an expensive piece from an exclusive plus-size boutique in New York, bought specifically for Bradley's firm's annual winter gala. She actually felt beautiful for the first time in months. The color complemented her pale skin and dark hair, and the cut hugged her full hips in a way that made her feel womanly rather than awkward. "You're not actually wearing that, are you?" Bradley's voice sliced through the quiet apartment, freezing Madeline's blood. He stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, adjusting his tailored tuxedo cuffs. His eyes, a cold, calculating blue, raked over her body with undisguised disgust. I thought it looked nice," Madeline stammered, her hands instinctively dropping to cover her stomach, a defensive gesture she had developed over years of his cruel remarks. "It looks like a tailored tent, Madeline," Bradley sneered, pouring himself a glass of Macallan 18 from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. "I told you to wear black. Black is slimming. Do you have any idea who is going to be at this gala? Harrison Miller is flying in from London. The senior partners are all bringing their wives, women who actually know how to put down a fork and step on a treadmill. I can't walk in with you looking like a stuffed olive." Tears pricked the corners of Madeline's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Bradley, please. We have to leave in 10 minutes. I can't change now, and I feel good in this." "I don't care how you feel," he snapped, slamming his glass down on the marble counter with a sharp clack. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. The smell of alcohol and expensive cologne washed over her. "I care about how you reflect on me. Go take it off." "No." The word slipped out before she could stop it. It was a tiny rebellion, a fragile spark of the confident woman she used to be before Bradley systematically hollowed her out. Bradley's face darkened. The charming veneer he presented to the world vanished, replaced by the monster she lived with behind closed doors. "What did you say to me?" "I said no, Bradley. I'm wearing this dress." She tried to turn away from him, to grab her wool coat from the rack, but she wasn't fast enough. Bradley lunged, his fingers wrapping around her right wrist like a steel vice. He didn't just hold her, he squeezed, digging his thumb directly into the sensitive tendons. "Let go of me! You're hurting me!" Madeline cried out, struggling to pull her arm back. Her weight, which he constantly ridiculed, was usually an anchor, but his grip was uniquely vicious, designed to inflict maximum pain. "You don't tell me no, you fat useless bitch," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You think anyone else would want you? You think anyone else would look twice at that body?" With a sudden violent jerk, Bradley twisted her arm backward and shoved her toward the glass coffee table. Madeline stumbled. She tried to catch her balance, but the heel of her shoe caught on the Persian rug. As she fell, Bradley kept his iron grip on her wrist, wrenching it at an unnatural angle. A loud, sickening snap echoed through the living room. Madeline screamed. It was a primal, agonizing sound that tore from her throat. She collapsed onto the floor, cradling her right arm against her chest. The pain was blinding, a white-hot flash of agony that made the room spin. Through her tear-blurred vision, she saw her wrist swelling rapidly, the bone jutting out at a horrifying, grotesque angle just beneath the skin. Bradley stood over her, breathing heavily, not an ounce of remorse in his eyes. He casually adjusted his lapels. "Look what you made me do. Now you've ruined the whole night." He stepped over her shaking body, grabbed his overcoat, and walked toward the front door. "Clean yourself up and take a cab to the emergency room. Tell them you tripped on the rug. If you say a word about me, I swear to God, Madeline, I'll make sure you end up on the street with absolutely nothing." The heavy oak door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Alone on the floor, Madeline sobbed into the carpet, her entire body trembling in shock and agony. It took her 20 minutes just to sit up. Using her good hand, she managed to retrieve her phone from her purse and call an Uber. She didn't call the police. She was too terrified, too conditioned by his threats. By 9 p.m., she was sitting in the harsh, fluorescent-lit waiting room of Boston Medical Center. Dr. Harrison, a kind-eyed orthopedic surgeon, confirmed the worst, a severe, displaced fracture of the distal radius. It required immediate resetting and a heavy plaster cast. When he gently asked how it happened, noting the dark, finger-shaped bruises already forming above the break, Madeline looked down at her lap, her face pale. "I tripped," she lied, her voice hollow. "I'm just clumsy." What Madeline didn't know, as she sat shivering in her ruined emerald dress, a heavy cast weighing down her arm, was that she was not as invisible as Bradley wanted her to believe. Someone saw her. Someone always watched over her. Dante Moretti did not believe in coincidences, and he certainly did not believe in letting things that belonged to him get damaged. To the FBI, Dante was the elusive, iron-fisted head of the Moretti crime syndicate, a man who controlled the docks, the underground casinos, and half the politicians in Massachusetts. To the public, he was a ruthless, reclusive billionaire with a penchant for bespoke Italian suits and complete anonymity. But to Madeline Hayes, he was just Mr. Rossi, the quiet, handsome regular who came into the midnight oven, the late-night bakery she managed on Hanover Street. For 2 years, Dante had sat in the corner booth every Thursday night, drinking black coffee and watching her. While her fiancé saw her body as a flaw to be hidden, Dante saw a masterpiece. He was captivated by her. He loved the soft, lush curves of her hips, the fullness of her thighs, the sweet, round apples of her cheeks when she smiled. To him, she was a Botticelli painting brought to life, warm, generous, and utterly magnificent. He had spent months slowly earning her tentative smiles, tipping excessively, and learning the shadows behind her eyes. He knew about Bradley Jenkins. Dante made it his business to know everything about the people he cared for. He knew Bradley was a worm, a pathetic middle-management parasite who abused his power. Dante had been waiting, biding his time, hoping Madeline would find the strength to leave him on her own. He didn't want to frighten her with his true world, unless he had to. But the time for waiting expired at exactly 9:45 p.m. Dante was in his private office at his estate in Weston when his burner phone buzzed. It was Leo, his most trusted lieutenant, whom Dante had secretly assigned to keep an eye on Madeline whenever she left the bakery late at night. "Boss," Leo's voice was tight, knowing the storm his words would unleash. "We have a situation. Miss Hayes is at Boston Medical Center." Dante went completely still. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Why?" "Broken wrist, a bad one, required resetting. Doctor noted defensive bruising on her forearm. She claims she tripped, but—" Leo paused. "We pulled the lobby security footage from her building. Jenkins left at 8:15 p.m., looked completely fine, went straight to a gala. Miss Hayes stumbled out 20 minutes later, crying, holding her arm." The silence on the line was deafening. Dante's hand tightened around the heavy crystal tumbler of whiskey on his desk until his knuckles turned pure white. "Is she safe right now?" Dante's voice was a terrifyingly calm, low baritone. "Yes." "Getting her cast fitted. She's shaken up, but she'll be discharged within the hour. Make sure her hospital bill vanishes. Have a secure car follow her cab back, but stay out of sight," Dante ordered, his eyes locking onto the glowing city skyline through his window. "And Leo?" "Yeah, boss. Assemble a crew. Just you, Matteo, and Silas. Meet me at Jenkins's building. We're paying a midnight call." By 11:30 p.m., Bradley Jenkins was back in his apartment. The gala had been a massive success for him. He had schmoozed with the senior partners, made excuses about his fiancée feeling under the weather, and secured a promising lead on a commercial real estate deal. He was completely drunk on expensive champagne and his own inflated ego. He loosened his bow tie, kicked off his patent leather shoes, and poured himself another glass of scotch, admiring his reflection in the night-darkened windows. He assumed Madeline was still at the hospital, or perhaps cowering in the bedroom. He didn't care. He felt invincible. At exactly 11:59 p.m., a heavy, rhythmic knock echoed through the apartment. Knock, knock, knock. Bradley frowned, glancing at the digital clock on the stove. "Madeline?" he called out, irritated. "Did you forget your damn keys again? I swear to God." He stomped to the door and yanked it open, ready to unleash another tirade of abuse. The words died in his throat. Standing in the hallway was not his trembling, weeping fiancée. It was a man, towering over 6 feet tall, dressed in a flawless midnight blue overcoat. The man's face looked as though it were carved from granite, sharp jaw, patrician nose, and eyes so dark and hollow they looked like the abyss. Flanking him were 3 massive men who radiated quiet, lethal violence. Before Bradley could even process the threat, the man in the blue coat stepped forward. A gloved hand shot out, grabbing Bradley by the throat with terrifying speed. Bradley choked, his feet lifting off the hardwood floor as he was shoved backward into his own apartment. The door clicked shut behind them, locking out the world. The man slammed Bradley against the expensive imported wallpaper, the impact knocking the wind out of his lungs. "Who are you?" Bradley gasped, clawing desperately at the leather-clad hand crushing his windpipe. "What do you want? Take whatever you want." Dante Moretti leaned in, the scent of mint and cold winter air washing over Bradley's panic sweat. "I am the consequence of your actions, Bradley," Dante whispered, his voice smooth, cultured, and dripping with venom. "I am the man who loves the woman you just broke." Bradley's eyes widened in sheer terror. Madeline? You know Madeline? I know that she is perfect, Dante said, his grip tightening just a fraction. I know that her body is a temple that you have desecrated with your filthy, unworthy words. I know that she is soft and brilliant and beautiful. And I know that about 3 hours ago, you put your pathetic, weak hands on her and snapped her bone. It was an accident! Bradley squealed, tears of pain and fear streaming down his flushed face. She tripped! I swear! Dante's expression didn't change, but his eyes flashed with demonic fury. He nodded slightly to Matteo. Without a word, Matteo stepped forward, grabbed Bradley's right arm, and wrenched it flat against the entryway console table. You see, Bradley, in my world, we operate on a very simple principle of equivalence, Dante explained, casually unbuttoning his overcoat. An eye for an eye. A bone for a bone. Wait, please! Do you know who I am? Bradley shrieked, struggling frantically against the two men who now pinned him in place. I have money, I have lawyers, and I have Boston, Dante replied simply. He reached into his coat and produced a heavy, solid steel telescoping baton. With a flick of his wrist, it extended with a sharp, metallic clack. You made her feel small, Bradley. You made her feel ugly, because you were too much of a coward to realize she was out of your league. Tonight, you're going to learn exactly how small you really are. Dante stepped up to the console table. Bradley squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing hysterically, begging for a mercy he had never once shown his fiancée. Dante raised the steel baton. This, Dante said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, is for her wrist. The steel came down in a blinding arc. Madeline Hayes stood frozen in the cold, sterile hospital lobby, clutching her heavy plaster cast tightly against her chest. The sliding glass doors hissed open, letting in a bitter gust of Boston wind, but she barely registered the freezing temperature. She was utterly terrified of going back to the Commonwealth Avenue apartment. Bradley would be waiting for her. He would be furious that she took so long, angry about the unexpected medical bills, and enraged simply because she existed and inconvenienced him. She pulled her thin wool coat tighter over her ruined emerald wrap dress, fresh tears threatening to spill down her pale cheeks. Suddenly, a sleek black Maybach silently rolled to a stop directly in front of the hospital entrance, blocking the line of waiting taxicabs. The rear door swung open, and a towering figure stepped out onto the illuminated pavement. Madeline gasped, taking a panicked, defensive step backward. But as the man moved into the harsh glow of the street lamps, her sheer terror morphed into pure bewilderment. It was Mr. Rossi, the quiet, handsome regular from the Midnight Oven Bakery, who always ordered a single black coffee and left $100 tips on the counter. But he was not wearing his usual understated leather jackets. Tonight, he wore a bespoke midnight blue cashmere overcoat, and he moved with a terrifying, predatory grace that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up in immediate alarm. Madeline, Dante said, his voice a low, soothing baritone that unexpectedly settled her racing heart. He did not ask what had happened to her arm. He stepped forward and gently reached out, his large, warm hands hovering just inches from her broken wrist without actually touching the plaster. His dark eyes, usually so calm and observant at the bakery, were swirling with an intense protective fury that she had never witnessed before. You are not going back to that apartment. You are coming with me. You are safe now, Mia Bella. The Italian endearment slipped out effortlessly, wrapping around her bruised and battered heart like a warm, protective shield. She wanted to argue, to ask how he possibly knew she was at Boston Medical Center in the middle of the night. But physical exhaustion and throbbing pain won out. She allowed him to gently guide her into the plush, heated leather interior of the luxury vehicle. The heavy doors closed, sealing out the freezing wind and the absolute horrors of her evening. Dante sat beside her, radiating a comforting, solid heat. He poured a glass of sparkling water from a hidden compartment and carefully handed it to her. "Bradley Jenkins will never bother you again," Dante stated flatly, his tone leaving absolutely no room for doubt, negotiation, or argument. Madeline shivered, a sudden realization washing over her that Mr. Rossi was a very powerful, very dangerous man. The drive to the affluent suburb of Weston took less than 30 minutes. The Maybach pulled up to a massive gated estate surrounded by ancient, towering oak trees and high stone walls lined with security cameras. Inside, the mansion was warm, opulent, and incredibly intimidating. Dante led her up the sweeping mahogany staircase to a massive guest suite featuring a roaring marble fireplace and a king-sized bed. "My housekeeper, Rosa, has left fresh clothes in the adjoining bathroom. They are your size," Dante explained, lingering respectfully in the doorway. He looked at her not with the pity she expected, but with absolute reverence. "Rest tonight, Madeline. Tomorrow, I will explain everything you wish to know. Nobody can touch you here." When Madeline awoke the next morning, the sharp throbbing in her arm was dulled by the prescription medication, but the reality of her surreal situation hit her like a freight train. She showered awkwardly with a plastic bag taped over her cast and found the clothes Rosa had meticulously laid out. A luxurious, emerald green silk lounge set that draped perfectly over her thick thighs, full hips, and soft stomach. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel the overwhelming need to suck in her breath, hide her generous curves, or apologize for taking up space. She walked downstairs, following the rich aroma of fresh espresso to a sunlit dining room where Dante was waiting patiently, reading the morning paper. He stood immediately when she entered, pulling out a velvet-upholstered chair for her. "My true name is Dante Moretti," he began, bypassing polite small talk entirely. "I run what the federal government politely refers to as an organized crime syndicate, and I have been entirely captivated by you since the day you handed me a cannoli 2 years ago." Madeline dropped her silver fork, the heavy metal clattering loudly against the fine bone china. You're the mafia?" she whispered, her brown eyes wide with shock. "And you care about me? But Bradley always says—" Dante cut her off, his eyes flashing with lethal, unyielding intent at the mere mention of her abuser's name. "Bradley is a pathetic, broken insect," Dante growled, stepping closer and kneeling beside her chair so they were perfectly eye to eye. He reached up, gently tracing the soft line of her jawline with his thumb. "Bradley hated your radiant light because he lives his entire pathetic life in the dark. He continually mocked your weight and your body because he knew it was a masterpiece he was entirely unworthy to touch. You are a goddess, Madeline. You are soft, brilliant, breathtaking, and entirely perfect." Madeline burst into tears, the heavy years of systematic psychological torture breaking open and washing away. Dante pulled her into his broad, muscular chest, letting her cry into his expensive shirt, swearing silently to the universe that no one would ever make his queen shed a tear of pain again. For the next 3 weeks, Madeline lived in a state of surreal, healing bliss. Dante showered her with gentle affection and deep respect, He brought in private Michelin-starred chefs who cooked rich, decadent meals, and he encouraged her to eat without an ounce of shame, kissing the soft curves of her stomach and worshipping the thick thighs she used to passionately hate. He ordered bespoke designer dresses tailored specifically to celebrate her fat, beautiful figure, proving daily that she didn't need to shrink herself to be loved. She just needed a real man who understood how to appreciate her power. But the tranquil peace of Dante's western estate was merely the quiet calm before a violent, bloody storm. Bradley Jenkins had barely survived Dante's midnight visit, but his right arm was shattered into fragments, ruined beyond any medical repair. Stripped of his arrogant pride, terrified of his own shadow, and fired from his prestigious downtown real estate firm due to his sudden inability to perform, Bradley became wildly desperate. He knew Dante Moretti was completely untouchable by the police, but Bradley harbored a dark secret. For years he had been quietly laundering real estate money for the Romano family, the Moretti syndicate's oldest, most vicious, and heavily armed rivals. Consumed by a toxic cocktail of humiliation and revenge, Bradley crawled to Vincent Romano, a ruthless mob boss who fiercely controlled the Boston Harbor docks. Bradley sold Dante's only known weakness directly to his worst enemies, Madeline. "She's hiding at the Western Estate," Bradley sneered through broken, wired teeth, sitting in Vincent's smoke-filled warehouse. "Hit the house tonight. Take the fat bitch. Moretti will surrender everything he owns to get her back." The brutal attack came on a freezing Tuesday night, exactly 1 month after Madeline had finally left Bradley. Dante was in his mahogany-paneled study, reviewing international shipping manifests, while Madeline was curled up on the leather sofa in the library, reading a novel. A sudden, massive, earth-shaking explosion violently shattered the tranquility of the estate. The reinforced iron front gates had been blown entirely off their hinges. Security sirens wailed into the night, and the distinct, terrifying crackle of automatic gunfire echoed fiercely through the manicured, snow-covered grounds. Dante burst into the library, his midnight blue cashmere overcoat replaced by a heavy, tactical Kevlar vest, a customized Glock 19 gripped tightly in his hands. He grabbed Madeline's good arm, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying focus. "We need to move right now," Dante ordered, pulling her rapidly toward a hidden wooden panel behind a towering bookshelf. "Vincent Romano's men are here." Madeline's heart hammered violently against her ribs, but to her own surprise, she didn't freeze or panic. She trusted Dante Moretti completely with her life. They quickly descended a narrow, spiraling concrete stairwell into a heavily reinforced steel bunker located deep beneath the mansion. Leo and Matteo, Dante's most loyal and lethal enforcers, were already stationed there, rapidly arming themselves with military-grade tactical weapons. "They have at least 30 armed men on the lawn, boss," Leo reported grimly, racking the heavy slide of an assault rifle. "Vincent Romano is leading the assault personally, and they brought Bradley Jenkins with them. He's waiting like a coward in a black armored SUV parked just outside the perimeter." Dante's dark eyes turned into pitch-black voids of pure, unadulterated murder. He turned to Madeline, gently cupping her terrified face with his leather-gloved hands. "Stay right here. Lock the heavy steel vault door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me." Madeline nodded bravely, tears streaming down her flushed face. "Come back to me, Dante. Please." He kissed her fiercely, claiming her soft lips with a desperate, burning passion that promised immense violence to anyone who tried to separate them. "I am the devil, Mia Bella. I always come back from hell." Dante grabbed a heavy combat shotgun from the weapon rack, racked it with a terrifyingly loud clack, and charged back up the concrete stairs, followed closely by his heavily armed crew. The battle above ground was swift, chaotic, and completely merciless. Dante moved like a vengeful god of war through his ruined luxury mansion, neutralizing Romano soldiers with ruthless, practiced precision. He didn't just fight to protect his lucrative territory. He fought to protect the woman who had brought beautiful light and warmth back into his cold, blood-soaked life. Within 20 violent minutes, the invading Romano forces were entirely decimated, their bodies littering the expensive marble floors of the foyer. Vincent Romano lay bleeding out by the grand sweeping staircase, desperately begging for mercy. Dante didn't even pause his stride, ending the rival boss with a single, cold trigger pull. The Mafia war was instantly over. But Dante wasn't quite finished yet. Dante walked slowly out into the freezing night air, the fresh snow crunching loudly beneath his heavy combat boots. He marched straight toward the black armored SUV, still parked outside the destroyed iron gates. Inside the vehicle, Bradley Jenkins was frantically trying to start the engine, his permanently ruined arm enclosed in a heavy, dirty cast, his face pale with absolute terror as he realized Vincent's men were all dead. Dante casually shattered the driver's side reinforced window with the heavy butt of his shotgun. He reached inside, grabbed Bradley firmly by his expensive coat collar, and dragged him violently out into the freezing cold, tossing him pathetic and whimpering into a snowbank. "I told you very clearly that I was the consequence of your actions," Dante whispered, standing tall over the pathetic, sniveling man. "But you arrogantly refuse to learn your lesson, Bradley. Please, I'm sorry. I'll leave Boston tonight. You'll never see my face again," Bradley screamed, crawling backward in the wet snow like a wounded, pathetic animal. Dante simply shook his head, looking down at Bradley with nothing but absolute disgust. He didn't use a weapon this time. He just gave a subtle nod to Matteo and Leo, who had emerged from the smoke. The two massive enforcers grabbed Bradley by his legs and dragged him screaming away into the pitch-black darkness, ensuring the abusive coward would never again see the light of day. Dante returned to the underground bunker, his clothes covered in soot and blood, but very much alive. Madeline threw herself passionately into his strong arms, sobbing with profound relief. "It's over," Dante whispered, burying his face in her dark, fragrant hair, holding her soft, full body tightly against his armored chest. "You are safe forever, my queen." 1 year later, Madeline Moretti stood confidently in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in an ultra-luxurious bridal boutique in Milan, Italy. She wore a breathtaking, custom-made, ivory lace gown that beautifully hugged her full hips and proudly accentuated her magnificent, voluptuous curves. Her wrist had fully healed, leaving only a faint white scar that Dante reverently kissed every single night. She was no longer a frightened victim, shrinking herself for cruel men. She was the beautiful, confident, reigning queen of the Moretti Empire, fiercely loved by her husband and deeply respected by everyone in the city. Dante stepped into the lavish fitting room, slipping his strong arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder, and smiling at their reflection. They were entirely unstoppable. For years, Malene believed love required her to become smaller, quieter, and easier to control. Bradley used that fear to break her. Dante saw what Bradley never could. Her softness was not weakness. Her body was never something to apologize for, and her loyalty deserved protection, not punishment. The scar on her wrist remained, but it no longer represented the night she was broken. It became proof that she survived, walked away, and never allowed another man to decide her worth again. Would you have trusted Dante after discovering who he truly was, or would his dangerous world have made you leave? Share your answer below and subscribe for more powerful mafia romance stories.